Hi everyone. So the next part of this session is all about the different types of cells that we see in the human body. I wanted to show you some pretty pictures of them so that you have a bit of an idea of the fact that they all look different, even though the way that I'm going to present what's in them and on them is quite bland looking, I guess. But what I wanted you to have in the back of your head is that all of the stuff that I'm going to talk about in the next part of this session applies to all the cells that we're going to be looking at the moment. Some pretty pictures of them. So how is it that we can study the actual cells, considering that you can't really see them with your naked eye? So what is it that you need to do in order for you to see these cells? Okay. Well, we have quite a range of different microscopes that are able to enlarge and zoom into not just tissues, but also down to singular cells and also what's inside the cells. Okay, so for example, over here we have something we call the transmission electron microscope, or TEM, and these microscopes are a pretty powerful way of looking of what is actually inside the cells themselves, on a very finite kind of structures. Then we also have a confocal laser scanning microscope, or that's a fancy way of saying fluorescent microscope. Now, fluorescent microscopes are one of those microscopes that are really good for basically coloring in your cells. So we have these tools called antibodies, fluorescent antibodies, where using different lights and different lasers, we can basically color in something that's not really colorful. So your cells themselves are not colorful, but if you add dye to them, so you basically color them in, you can see different parts of them in the cells sort of whole sort of cells way. So this fluorescent microscope or confocal microscope is able to provide you with that image, the way to look at the cells in a colorful way. So for example, over here we have a cell which has a green border, okay? Then it has some red sort of lines inside, and you will learn about it in a minute, where that these red lines are actually something we call the cytoskeleton. And then you have this big blob, blue blob, I guess, in the middle of each cell that you can see. And that big blue blob is actually a nucleus, okay? So just by coloring in with different colors, in this case it's the red, blue and green, you're able to see different parts of the cell already. So you can see the plasma membrane, or what surrounds the cell already. You can see the cytoskeleton in red, and you can see the blue nucleus. Okay, so different microscopes will be able to you can use different microscopes to see, I guess, different parts of a cell in a more of a colorful way. So it brings the cells to life. Okay, so using these sorts of approaches, let's have a look at some of the actual cells. So you can see on top that we have these pancakey looking cells. But at the bottom, we see that we have cells that are really stuck together, okay? So these two cells are obviously completely different. They come from completely different points in your body, because the top ones, they're big, pancakey, flat cells, but they don't really like to stick together in an ordered fashion, right? Whereas the bottom ones are actually, they like their friends. They like to be stuck together. Okay, so both of these cells are obviously going to perform different functions because they look different. Okay, here's another example. This is an example of cells in culture that the cell type is actually the one that lines your gut. Okay, So, for example, if we use transmission electron microscope that I talked about in the previous slide, you can see that the cell itself is actually quite tall. Here's its nucleus, that what was black or blue in the other session. You have the nucleus here, and you have this border here that we call the brush border. And you can see that brush border, when you zoom it in, it's almost like little protrusions, I guess, that are coming from the top of the cell. So this here, over here, is one cell, and this is the brush border, and you're looking at it from the side. So this is our nucleus, one cell with the brush border, and this is the brush border the way it looks like when it's completely zoomed in. Now, what you can see is that these cells are actually quite tall, but they also really, really like their friends. So they're able to communicate with these cells and make like a little barrier between the outside, which is somewhere around here, so touching the brush border, and inside of the cell, which would be your basal lamina. Okay. Now, interestingly, these cells themselves are also able to form lumens. Okay, so you can also put them in an arrangement where they actually form a little tube, I guess. And what is your intestine? It's actually a tube. Okay, so these guys here, for example, you will see the brush border in red here. So this is a fluorescent microscope image with this black stuff inside actually being empty. That's your lumen. Okay, and this green point here is the connection between the cells themselves and underlying tissue. Okay, so this is basically almost a cross section of your intestine. Okay, blue in here in this image is nucleus again. Okay, so you can see that there's quite a lot of cells that are really tightly packed together with brush border really nicely defined and able to communicate with the inside of the environment using this green stuff. Okay, now this is important for these cells because these cells are the ones that, you know, as you eat, you are putting into your body not just food, but everything else that comes with food. You know, the food is not sterile. So these cells really need to protect you, I guess, from the outside world. And to do that, they really jam-pack themselves in order to make sure that they have this really, really tight environment inside your intestine. Okay, and I'm sure that you know already that if you disrupt that in some sort of way, so the cells are not as packed anymore, you actually get problems. For example, a leaky gut. Okay. What about these cells? These are a bit weird, aren't they? So these pink ones here, you can see that they're quite long. Yeah, they're very, very long things, and they have these lines going across them and these purpley things. Yeah, this is not a fluorescent microscope image. This is using a different stain, and these cells themselves are actually muscle cells. Okay, so this long point here is one muscle cell. And these little purpley dots are actually nuclei. And we'll come back to this point again when where you will see that you are in your body. Most of the cells only have one nucleus, as I've showed you previously in the cells that line your gut. These cells are type of cells that what we call multinucleated. They have more than one nucleus inside them. Okay, and they have these characteristic sort of lines which we call striations, and we are actually going to be talking about the muscle cells in general in a couple of sessions time. What about these guys here? These are a bit sort of odd looking things. How about I tell you that these are actually the same cells, yeah? But what has happened between A and B is that these cells here were fed with some fat. What these cells are able to do, they're called fibroblasts. Are called fibroblasts, and we will come back to these fibroblasts in a couple of sessions' time. These fibroblasts are incredible because they're able to differentiate themselves into different cells. And one of the cells that is able to differentiate into is something called adipocyte, which is what you see in B. Okay, so this cell here, for example, this is one cell. You don't really see a nucleus because it's not a fluorescent microscope image, but what you do see is that the cell itself is jam-packed with these, blobs. Yeah, these blobs are actually like liposomes. They're actually vesicles or parts that are inside the cell that are full of fat. Okay, now fat, as you know, is a good thing because it provides you with energy. It also provides you with protection. So you do have the need for these cells to take up the fat and store it away. Okay. Obviously, sometimes when you have a disharmony or the homeostasis is disrupted, you have a lot more of the adipocytes, for example, under your skin than you really should, which leads to obesity problems. Okay, so these cells are pretty incredible. They basically soak up all the fat and they hold on to it. And when the time comes when the other cells around it need them, or they themselves need them, they kind of tap into that storage of fat and they make their own little food for themselves. So fibroblasts, muscle cells, fibroblasts, and adipocytes. All three of them you will see later on as you go through BIOH111. So I'd like you to keep these images in your head, please. What about these guys? These guys are pretty full on, aren't they? Well, I'm sure that you guys have guessed it. These are neurons, different types of neurons. So here's in green, these are both fluorescent images. So in green here, you can see these massive sort of projections coming out of what we call a cell body, okay? So this one cell, you can't actually see the end of it because you can't see all of these different projections that are green coming out of this cell body, okay? This is very characteristic of neurons because they need to communicate with other neurons in a very effective and very fast way. So they've evolved a way of looking like this, as they to perform that function. What about these green ones? The red ones. The red ones in this image are actually what we called glial cells or supporting cells. Now, these neuroglia are the ones that are there to perform or help the function of neurons. So you will find them in very close proximity to the actual neurons, but they're not the ones that are actually receiving the messages and sending them away. They are helping the neurons do exactly that. Now, over the last sort of decade or so, we've made some progress in culturing or making artificial neurons. And you can see a picture of it, and it's an example of one of them over on this side here. This is actually quite useful in terms of studying neuronal function, in terms of studying how you can regulate the different neurons. So while it can be a bit gross to think about neurons in a dish, they're actually a very, very good model for scientists to use to figure out what is, why is the dopaminergic neuron completely different from hippocampal neuron? Why is these different subpopulations of neurons in your brain? And how can we make sure that if something goes wrong, we bring it back to homeostasis? Okay. What about these ones? These ones are a bit odd. So this one here is something, they're two cells. The blue, again, is nucleus. But you can see around it is something called we call a cytoplasm. And you can see that there's not a lot of cytoplasm in these cells. There's a lot of nucleus, but not a heck of a lot of anything else, okay? This is because these cells, the primary function of these cells is actually they're T cells, so they're part of immune response. They're part of making sure that your body responds really quickly to a foreign invader. Okay, so these cells really all they do is make protein. That's their job. Okay, which is why they don't have a heck of a lot of anything else other than nucleus. And in next session and the session after that, you will see why is it that I'm saying all they need to do is make protein, and how is that relevant to these cells. This guy here is an interesting one. So this red blob here is red blood cell. Okay, and it's a red blood cell that's dead. It's unusable anymore. Okay, so we have to remove it. These green parts, these green sort of dots around it, are actual bacteria. And what this cell, this purple cell, is evolved to do is to bring into itself these bacteria, these cells that we're not going to use anymore, and use it as a way of digesting them. Okay, so this purple cell here is actually also part of the immune response, for example, against the bacteria. And the cell itself is called a macrophage. Okay, so macro meaning big, phage meaning eating. So it's able to eat big things. Okay. So both of these cell types are part of your immune response, and you're not going to be encountering these in BIOH111. BIOH111, you will see them in BIOH122. But I wanted you to have a bit of an understanding of the shapes of these different cells and how that actually relates to their function. So you can see that this purple cell here has these massive sort of projection-y kind of like things, and that the macrophage uses it to latch onto something foreign and bring it in to eat it. Okay, it's almost like a little hand that comes out, grabs whatever it needs and brings it in so that the macrophage itself can eat it. Okay. That's not characteristic of all the cells. Macrophage is very much an exaggeration when it comes to these hands, because that's its job. Yeah, its job is to eat big things, so it needs big hands to bring things in. Okay, so this is the end of this session, this part of the session. Where I really just wanted you to start thinking about cells in different shapes and sizes, and why they are different shapes and sizes. What is it about them that they have to be different shapes and sizes? So why is it that macrophage needs these big long hands, and why is it that the neuron needs these massive extensions that stay in place, whereas these hands on macrophage go in and out? Yeah, they go out, they grab things and they bring them in, whereas in neuron these extensions stay in their place. So why is it that that's happening, and why is that different from the cells that are lining your gut? Because they all perform different functions. They all have to look differently, so they all have to have different structure in order to perform the function that they are meant to perform. So macrophage is definitely not going to be able to line your gut properly, because it doesn't have that connection or ability to connect with other cells. But what it can do is live just under those big columnar cells that protect your gut, live just under, so that if anything does pass, these long hands are able to grab it and eat it and protect you even more on the inside. So different cells, different shapes, different structures, because they have different functions. See you at the next one.